Hi there, today I want to talk about motherboard form factors. This is the size of a motherboard and is going to explain some of the standards of this and how this is different from this. So they're both motherboards, they both have a standard. I want you to be able to identify that this is a micro ATX and this is the ATX, among other things. So I want to start off with a story. Back when I was growing up, my friend had this Dell XPS 435T/9000. If that doesn't mean anything to you, just know that it was big and it was fast. We love this thing. It had a Core i7, had a Radeon HD 4850 or something. I don't know. It was huge. It weighed over 25 pounds. So come time where I finally was able to open the lid on this thing, I saw something weird and just something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it. I really couldn't. Then, about 10 years later, someone brought this same computer into my shop and I saw it right away. The motherboard that was in this was a non-conforming motherboard. It was a proprietary format developed by Dell. And when I say non-conforming, I mean that it didn't fit into ATX standards, it didn't fit into BTX standards, it was just kind of its own thing. And that motherboard was only compatible with that case, made by Dell, and there was no way I could have upgraded this computer for this client because it just wasn't possible. Not that I needed to anyways. I had a good i7, still good today. So let's start back when form factors first came around. Back in the 1980s, IBM started its first mass marketing of a computer, a personal desktop system. It was just called the PC. And the way that motherboard was made became the PC standard. And when I say standard, I meant that the standard was the board had to be this long, the screw holes had to be here, here, here in relativity to another. This standard set out where to put stuff and why. So the CPU was here because better airflow. The slots were over here because that's where the back of the case was. This is, in essence, what a motherboard standard is. It is defining where stuff goes, and it's important to follow that because if you make a non-conforming motherboard, you might not be able to find parts that are compatible. You might not be able to find a case that's compatible or even a power supply that is compatible with it. So there would be a few more standards such as XT, AT, LPX, NLX, WTX, and BTX. The idea is that there was always these evolving standards. As components changed and the general PC market changed, these form factors changed as well. It's great to have a standard. That way you can easily buy a motherboard for your computer that say maybe was made by a different manufacturer, but we know that these motherboards will be compatible. So there's a lot of motherboard factors that have come and gone, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is we don't use the same components that we did 20, 30 years ago. We don't use ISA cards. We don't use PCI cards. We don't use IDE connectors. And the idea is that there are different things and we've adapted to that. The next thing is we were able to make smaller components. We were able to make smaller motherboards as a result of that. And there is a demand for smaller computers. No one wants a giant 40-pound IBM computer on their desk when they can get a simple 10-pound desktop and it works. There are some standards that tried to come into being, such as the BTX standard. As you all might be fun to remember, it came and went really quick. And the idea was someone tried to improve upon it, but it just didn't work and the industry didn't pick up with it. So it never formalized itself as an industry standard. So nowadays we have the long-standing ATX standard. ATX is the elephant in the room that we have to talk about. The first revision specifications were published back in June of 1995 by Intel. And nowadays there are 4 major revisions or 4 different types of it that we use in most computers. This is going to count for most desktop systems. And that is ATX, that is mini ITX, there is micro ATX, and then there is extended ATX. All 4 of these have different use cases. So ATX might be used for your typical gaming build where you want a lot of features and you might want a lot of expandability, lots of ports. Micro ATX is what I use in my systems. I build for the small office, home office, where the system is generally going to remain the same for the rest of its lifetime. It possibly has some expansion for a PCI Express graphics card, but that's kind of the limit of what you're working against. Next is mini ITX. These are very small toaster-like PCs. That's not to say they're not powerful though. It's just really tiny, really compact, and you're limited to about one PCI Express 16 lane slot. Enough for a graphics card and maybe some storage. These PCs are usually built and not much changes with them for the rest of their life, simply because there's no space to add. There is no space to add more RAM, there's no space to add a second graphics card, etc. And the last one is extended ATX. This is what you'll find in a lot of servers. So it does follow that ATX where the screw holes are, but the motherboard is allowed to go in deeper, i.e. the depth of it from the rear IO back is allowed to go back further. And these are usually case specific. You'll find a lot less standardization here, as these boards are usually custom made. There's not a lot of them made. They're made for the server environment. They're made for the high performance computing environment. And given that some of them can support 2 CPUs and lots of RAM, so you'll find a lot of proprietary and very highly specific applications with extended ATX, not what you'll find in your typical gaming build or your home office build. If you look on Intel's website, they have a lot of specifications and design criteria and just suggested practices if you're into designing motherboards or trying to understand exactly how long the ATX standard is. This is usually a good resource to go to. And of course, there's other stuff like Wikipedia, and there's some third-party sites that will explain some specifications of it. These specifications are super important to design for, to ensure maximum compatibility with any components you might be designing for it or wanting to be accepted within it, and also to ensure that there's maximum product acceptance within the market. If no one has a case for your motherboard form factor, no one's going to buy it. This happened with the BTX standard about 14 years ago. When you buy components for your motherboard, it's super important that you find stuff that is compatible. Find a graphics card that is compatible. Find a graphics card that is going to fit in your case. Find RAM that's going to fit on your motherboard. Don't buy laptop RAM, buy desktop RAM. It's important that you find a CPU cooler that is going to be compatible with your motherboard. It's going to be important to find a CPU that's going to work on your motherboard. So there's lots of different components. The motherboard connects everything, so it's important that everything is compatible. Form factors is just one thing among many other things that you have to look at when finding and buying and selecting and designing PC systems. So I hope this video has taught you something about form factors, and it's important that you see the specification and understand it. And if I was to leave some parting personal advice from this, it doesn't matter how big your motherboard is. A lot of gamers think that they need a huge motherboard. You can actually find high performance small boards, such as a mini ITX board to run your Ryzen 9 processor or your Intel Core i9 processor. It's not the size that matters, and you see a lot of gaming desktops are just huge. It's not needed. You can get high performance in small form factors. This is a kind of an old myth that I've heard a lot of people talk about. So I hope this video has taught you about form factors. Leave a comment below if it has, and like and subscribe, please. Bye. Bye.